One might have thought that after the Bay of Pigs, after the catastrophe of Vietnam, after the sordid history of backing death squads from El Salvador to Argentina, the American political establishment would have developed at least a vestigial sense of shame about resource extraction disguised as humanitarian intervention. But to think this would be to underestimate the capacity of the Republican Party, and particularly its present orange-hued avatar, to mistake repetition for innovation and mendacity for statecraft. The Trump administration now beats the drums of war against Venezuela, and we are asked to believe, with faces presumably straight, that this has everything to do with the scourge of narcotics, and nothing whatsoever to do with the fact that Venezuela sits atop 303 billion barrels of proven oil reserves, the largest such stockpile on the planet. The official justification has the administration fighting a war on drugs, but the paperwork tells a rather different story. The State Department's own International Narcotics Control Strategy report, published in March of this year, identifies Mexico, not Venezuela, as the sole significant source of illicit fentanyl affecting the United States. The Drug Enforcement Administration concurs. The synthetic opioid crisis flows from Mexican cartels operating some 3,000 miles from Caracas, not from boats bobbing in the Caribbean. As one researcher from the Washington office on Latin America put it with admirable terseness, Venezuela's connection to the American overdose epidemic is zero. But facts have never troubled this administration when there is a resource-rich nation to destabilize. Consider the choreography now underway. Warships have been dispatched to the southern Caribbean in the largest naval buildup since the Cuban Missile Crisis. The USS Gerald R. Ford, America's most advanced aircraft carrier, now prowls waters off the Venezuelan coast, accompanied by nearly a dozen naval vessels and some 15,000 military personnel. The administration has designated Nicolas Maduro and his government as a foreign terrorist organization, a legalistic sleight of hand designed to circumvent the constitutional requirement that Congress authorize military force. Trump has declared Venezuelan airspace closed in its entirety, an assertion that would embarrass even the most swaggering imperial proconsul, given that the United States possesses no such authority over sovereign foreign territory. Meanwhile, a Republican congresswoman from Florida, one Maria Salazar, has helpfully dispensed with the pretense entirely. Venezuela for the American oil companies, she announced on Fox Business with the enthusiasm of someone who has just discovered an unguarded cash register, will be a field day because it will be more than $1 trillion in economic activity. When even the cover story cannot survive first contact with a friendly interviewer, one begins to appreciate the sheer contempt in which the American public is held. The administration's stated rationale crumbles upon the slightest examination. We are told that Maduro runs something called the Cartel de los Soles, the Cartel of the Suns, a drug trafficking network embedded within the Venezuelan military. But as several analysts have noted, this cartel is not an organization in any meaningful sense. It is a decades-old Venezuelan colloquialism for corrupt military officers who take bribes. The phrase mocks rather than describes an operational entity. To declare war on a figure of speech is novel, even by the standards of American foreign policy absurdism. More revealing still is what the administration does when actual drug traffickers fall into its lap. On the very same day that Trump threatened to rain fire upon Venezuela's supposed narco-terrorists, he pardoned Juan Orlando Hernandez, the former president of Honduras, who was serving a 45-year sentence for trafficking more than 400 tons of cocaine into the United States. Hernandez, described by federal prosecutors as the linchpin of one of the largest and most violent drug trafficking conspiracies in the world, walked free from a West Virginia penitentiary with presidential benediction. The man took bribes from El Chapo himself and once bragged he would stuff the drugs up the gringos' noses. But Hernandez was a useful ally, a right-wing president who kept Honduras in Washington's orbit, and so his sins were absolved with a stroke of the presidential pen. The message could not be clearer if it were tattooed across the forehead of every administration official. The war on drugs is a selective instrument wielded against adversaries and sheathed when convenient. The problem with Maduro is not that he allegedly traffics narcotics. The problem is that he controls 300 billion barrels of oil and declines to share them with Chevron on terms favorable to Houston. Those who have studied American misadventure in Latin America will recognize the familiar choreography. In 1954, the CIA overthrew the democratically elected government of Guatemala because it had the temerity to expropriate unused lands from the United Fruit Company. In 1973, the Nixon administration and Henry Kissinger orchestrated the destruction of Chilean democracy, installing the butcher Pinochet because Salvador Allende believed Chilean copper should benefit Chileans. In 1964, Washington backed a military coup in Brazil against João Goulart, ushering in 21 years of dictatorship. The parade of corpses stretches through Argentina, through Uruguay, through El Salvador, through Nicaragua, everywhere that American corporate interests collided with local aspirations for economic sovereignty. The playbook never changes, only the pretexts. In Guatemala it was anti-communism. In Panama it was Manuel Noriega's drug trafficking, though Noriega had been a CIA asset for decades before his usefulness expired. Now in Venezuela it is the drug war again, that infinitely elastic justification for intervention that has never once succeeded in reducing American drug consumption, but has proved remarkably effective at toppling inconvenient governments. Permit me a moment of what might be called negative nostalgia. When the United States invaded Panama in 1989, it at least possessed the legal fig leaf of troops already stationed in the Canal Zone and the killing of an American Marine at a checkpoint. The Organization of American States and the European Parliament condemned the invasion as a flagrant violation of international law, but there was a procedural case to be made. Today, the Trump administration cannot even clear the low bar of manufacturing a convincing casus belli. Administration officials have admitted to Congress that they lack legal justification for strikes inside Venezuela. The Justice Department's Office of Legal Counsel has reportedly told lawmakers that current legal opinions do not permit attacks on Venezuelan territory. And yet, the military buildup continues, the rhetoric escalates, and the president tweets about closing foreign airspace as though sovereignty were a suggestion rather than a principle. The Venezuelan opposition leader, Maria Corina Machado, has promised to open the country's oil industry to foreign investment should she take power. Our message to the oil companies is, "We want you here," she declared to a largely American audience. One appreciates the directness. It saves everyone the trouble of pretending this has anything to do with democracy. The Trump administration, which has maintained cozy relations with authoritarian governments from Saudi Arabia to Hungary to the Philippines, has never shown the slightest interest in democracy except as a rhetorical cudgel. This is the same president who expressed admiration for Xi Jinping's abolition of term limits, who congratulated Erdogan on his constitutional referendum, who cannot bring himself to criticize Vladimir Putin even when American intelligence agencies detail Russian interference in American elections. The notion that such a man would dispatch carrier strike groups to the Caribbean out of concern for Venezuelan civil liberties is an insult to the intelligence of anyone who has been paying the slightest attention. What we are witnessing is colonialism with updated branding, the latest iteration of a policy that has treated Latin America as a resource depot and a strategic backyard for more than a century. The Monroe Doctrine never died, it merely acquired public relations consultants. Now we speak of freedom and democracy and combating narco-terrorism while preparing to seize oil fields and install compliant governments. The only thing that has changed is the sophistication of the lies, and even that sophistication is declining. There is something almost touchingly brazen about the way this administration conducts its foreign policy. Where previous architects of intervention at least troubled themselves to construct elaborate justifications, the domino theory, the communist menace, the threat to American lives that supposedly necessitated the invasion of Grenada, the Trump team cannot be bothered with such niceties. The president simply announces that Venezuelan airspace is closed, as though geography were subject to Twitter decree. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth allegedly orders all crew members killed on boats suspected of drug smuggling, without trial or confirmation of their cargo. The administration pardons an actual convicted drug kingpin, while simultaneously claiming to wage holy war against drug trafficking. The contradictions are not subtle, they are proudly displayed, daring anyone to call them out. Perhaps this is the final evolution of American empire, intervention without apology, extraction without pretense, lawlessness without shame. The Colombian president Gustavo Petro, observing the military buildup on his neighbor's border, stated the obvious: oil is at the heart of the matter, so that's a negotiation about oil. I believe that is Trump's logic. When the leader of a country that has extradited over 1,200 people to the United States for drug offenses calls out the hypocrisy of American anti-narcotics policy, one might think a moment of self-reflection would be in order. But self-reflection requires a capacity for embarrassment that this administration has conclusively demonstrated it does not possess. The irony, of course, is that any military adventure in Venezuela would likely prove catastrophic, even by the degraded standards the administration sets for itself. Venezuelan crude is heavy and sour, requiring specialized refineries and enormous capital investment to extract and process. The country's oil infrastructure has deteriorated catastrophically under Maduro's mismanagement. PDVSA, the state oil company, estimates that restoring peak production would cost $58 billion and take years. An invasion would trigger guerrilla resistance from pro-government militias, Colombian insurgents based inside Venezuela, and a population that, however much it despises Maduro, despises Yankee intervention more. The United States would find itself not liberating a grateful nation, but occupying a hostile one, in a country larger than Texas, with terrain that would make the Mekong Delta look hospitable by comparison. But these practical objections assume that the goal is actually to benefit Americans or Venezuelans. If the goal is instead to funnel contracts to defense companies, to open oil concessions to politically connected corporations, and to demonstrate imperial reach regardless of outcome, then the practical objections become irrelevant. War is good for certain kinds of business regardless of whether it achieves its stated aims. The contractors always get paid, the consultants always collect their fees, the executives always exercise their stock options. It is only the soldiers and the civilians, American and Venezuelan alike, who pay the price. As I write, the largest American naval armada in generations patrols the Caribbean, awaiting orders that may or may not come. The administration hints at imminent action while simultaneously floating the possibility of negotiations. Maduro mobilizes his militias and conducts defensive drills while reaching out through back channels for some accommodation. The whole spectacle has the quality of a grotesque dance, partners who despise each other circling warily while the orchestra plays themes from American foreign policy's greatest hits. If history teaches anything, it is that the victims of such adventures are rarely those who initiate them. The architects of the Guatemala coup lived long, comfortable lives. It was the Guatemalans who endured 4 decades of civil war and genocide. Henry Kissinger collected honorary degrees and consulted for Fortune 500 companies while Chilean mothers searched for the bodies of their disappeared children. The pattern is so consistent as to constitute a kind of natural law. The costs of American intervention are externalized onto the populations we claim to be liberating. What remains to be seen is whether the American public, exhausted by forever wars and increasingly skeptical of foreign adventures, will acquiesce to another round of military intervention in Latin America. The bipartisan criticism in Congress, however tepid, suggests that even the political establishment has begun to notice the contradiction between pardoning drug traffickers and bombing alleged drug boats. A war powers resolution has been introduced by an unlikely coalition of progressive Democrats and libertarian Republicans seeking to block further hostilities. Whether it will succeed or whether it will simply provide cover for lawmakers to express concern while allowing the war machine to grind forward remains to be determined. In the meantime, the bombs wait in their racks, the missiles rest in their tubes, and the oil beneath Venezuelan soil continues to exert its irresistible gravitational pull on American foreign policy. 300 billion barrels of proven reserves, just waiting for a sufficiently creative justification to extract them. The drug war has served admirably so far, but empires have never lacked for rationales. If the narco-terrorism pretext fails, another will be found. It always is.